Thank you very much, our viewers, for joining us. This is the Horn of Africa Digest program being developed and aired by Arts African Renaissance Television Services. This is our fourth program, and we'll continue on getting engaged in intellectual discourse with people from different backgrounds who are experts in Africa, especially Horn of African affairs. Today we have the honor of having Assistant Professor Samuel Teferra, who is an assistant professor at the Addis Ababa University Center for African and Asian Affairs. He will be joining us to discuss situations in the Horn of Africa, and I'll ask him some questions and see his reflections. And thank you very much, Dr. Samuel.
Thank you, Danny.
Okay, so it's going to be a question and answer session, but we can get into a discussion of some sort. So my first question would be, because this is a Horn of African Digest program, primarily dedicated in sharing perspectives of African intellectuals like you, how do you characterize the state of affairs in the Horn of Africa, especially regarding peace and insecurity at this moment?
Thank you very much. That's a very important question and a very important issue at this time. And I think in terms of peace and security issues in the Horn of Africa, we can explain it as a growing opportunity which is disguised in challenges from commissioned, securitized projects of the West. You know, the Horn of Africa for long has been a battlefield and a breeding ground for radical groups and their toxic and suicidal ideologies. Mm-hmm. And this is happening actually in a place where there is a huge military and intelligence presence in the name of fighting global terrorism and piracy. So there are positive developing stories coming out, the formation of coalitions, strong economic and military coalitions between member states in the Horn, and a pressure against that solidarity and regionalism, which is ongoing for the past 5 to 6, 7 years. And this actually has a lot to do with the coming into power of the new reformist group, political group in Ethiopia, which put its leader Abiy Ahmed as the prime minister. And those are shaking up what has been going on in the past. You know, we see the development of huge military camps in Djibouti, a huge concentration of that. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying there are no military camps elsewhere in Africa. There are, of course, in the West, in the center, in the south, in the north. But what we see in Djibouti is beyond imaginations. And those camps offer both positive and negative opportunities to the region. Mm-hmm. They are there, of course, we know, to control the movement of pirates and also the expansion of Al-Shabab, despite the fact that we haven't seen this materialized into actions in terms of containing and in terms of destroying the capabilities of those terrorist organizations, and they're being as threats to the regional peace and again to global peace, actually, because the Bab el-Mandab and the Red Sea area is a neck of a number of countries where huge import-export businesses are passing by. So, of course, okay, there has been those different ideologies, there have been those different interests in terms of getting the control over what happens in the region. Mm-hmm. There has been a long silence from the African Union side, mm-hmm. and African member states, IGAD member states in particular, who are very much closer by in terms of objecting or in terms of voicing their opinions pro and against what's happening in Djibouti, despite the presence of peace and security architectures and apparatuses in the African Union and in the region. So far we haven't heard any of that declaring any statement in support or against the presence of those huge political, military and intelligence presences of foreign
big powers,
and multinational powers. But against all odds, we also see some positive developments, particularly that can be explained in terms of new coalitions between countries which the West has never had dreamed to come true, to be true, to be a reality. And that includes the revitalization of political relationships and economic relationships between Ethiopia and Eritrea, which is the greatest advance of our time. I have never imagined in my life that Eritrea and Ethiopia would come to peaceful terms. When I have heard of Abiy Ahmed visiting Asmara, I was shocked. Like what the hell is he doing there, right? And you won't expect it. This was not something that we have anticipated, right?
Yeah.
Because of the kind of relationship that has been there, that has been surfaced for the past 20 years with no peace, no war situation.
Yeah.
We have seen families, the separation of families, the tortures, the challenge that refugees have faced, all sorts of the problems you can enlist. And also from the Ethiopian side, we've lost a number of our interests, our access to the port, and it has put us to solely depend on Djibouti with fewer alternatives. The challenge that we have with Somalia, with the Al-Shabab, was not also providing us opportunities to have alternatives. So the ongoing reform in Ethiopia, the coming into being of South Sudan, and the kind of attempts South Sudanese government with Ethiopian role, important and significant role, and the peace talks led by IGAD and IGAD Plus has brought relatively a good, peaceful situation in South Sudan, and South Sudan is now becoming a very wonderful ally from the West side as well.
Yeah.
So all these changes have not been dreamed of by any one of us, and they are bringing a new kind of formation of a political order in the Horn regions. You can see the emergence of new powers and the emergence of opportunities for new type of alliance in the Horn. So yeah, I can briefly say this.
Okay, that's very nice. I mean, to be honest, it sounds somehow pretty rosy. Like, I mean, the way you describe the situation, regardless of the fact that we are probably in a very threatening kind of stalemate in some ends, and hot war in wherever that we are engaged in. But I mean, from an intellectual point of view, I can see where you based your optimist attitude on what is actually happening in the Horn. But coming back to the peace and security situation, especially in the Horn, as an intellectual who have been studying the region for so long, and who is one of the renowned experts in the Horn of Africa, what would you say is one single most threatening factor that is obviously destabilizing the Horn of Africa, or threatening to destabilize, whether it's an individual or an ideology or a group? If I asked you, or if you were asked, come up with one specific most essential threat for peace and security in Africa, who would you say would be?
Yeah,
could be two or three.
There is. But before that, as a follow-up of what I have said earlier, first we need to see and understand the ongoing developing stories in the Horn of Africa, which partly is what I have mentioned earlier. You know, the Horn of Africa has attracted the interests of many for its geopolitical position, and also for its access to West Indian Ocean and the Red Sea coast, this long maritime region that we have. And interestingly which mainly is not much talked about, is the fact that the Horn of Africa has a lot of collectively shared values. It has people with unique and commonly shared cultural values in the region. You can mention the Somalis. And Ethiopia as a country, I can say, can be a sample for everything that goes on the Horn of African region. Ethiopia, we have Somalis, we have the Boranas, we have Tigray-speaking groups, we have clans, the Nuer and the Anuaks, we have the Murules. We have people who are all over the Horn countries, the Afars and the Isas.
That gives us a unique
that positions us uniquely in the region to be responsible to what happens in the region. And also, equally, it exposes us, it makes us vulnerable to what happens elsewhere, to repeat itself in what goes on in the country. But the biggest challenge and threat, I would say, now that surfaces in the Horn of African region is this clash of interest between the emerging and newly evolving Horn countries against the colonial propositions of the West. To put it clearly, you know, the political ideologies and the political strategies that the West has had in the Horn region can easily be narrated as, we know your problems, please don't tell us your symptoms, but we will prescribe the medicine from wherever we are. And this kind of mentality is a continuation of an extension of the colonial project that the West, particularly Europe, has had in Africa. And they wanted to maintain that status quo. And the emergence of new states, the spirit of regionalism, the push towards that, particularly with former ARC-4s, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. And despite all the challenges, the search and the quest for formation of or establishment of democratic institutions within their own countries, the improvements that we're witnessing in terms of instituting electoral boards, commissions, in order to make favorable conditions for people of those countries, 3 countries in particular, to elect their leaders fairly. And the challenges associated to that. All in all, I see to culminate in something that is positive ahead of us. So
I understand.
You know, it's a quest and a power struggle between the two, supposedly the weak but emerging group, and the strong and manipulative hegemonic group. They're fighting for a space.
So in that kind of scenario, where, I mean, that you put it very eloquently, that diversity of peoples in the Horn of Africa has its own benefit, I mean, magnificent, and at the same time it could be a risk for security and safety issues. So that was coming back to what I was talking about a bit earlier. The Horn of Africa is not a peaceful place now. Can we say that? No, right? So I was asking, could you name one specific factor? Like, could be a group, it could be, I'm not saying there could be one, but it could be many, but what's one most single important threat for the security in the Horn of Africa at this moment, for the situation that we are witnessing on the ground, in your expert opinion?
We can enlist many, as I have said, but it completely lies in the relation that I was mentioning about. But the entry point can be probably the the oppression, offensive against
Ethiopian.
terrorist elements like Al-Shabab.
Okay.
It has always been like that, you know. The West has always looked for an entry point. I'm not objecting. At times it's very important, but those actions against any elements that have negative impacts in terms of affecting your own political and economic interests should also be well consulted with the regional powers and the regional institutions of peace and security before unilaterally acting by your own. Today, while I was coming here, I was listening to a news where Russia, China, and 11 other countries have submitted paper to the UN, the United Nations, condemning long decades of US's unilateral actions
on many countries.
On many
not specifically Ethiopia.
Not specifically
because I didn't
many countries. Ethiopia is
one
not
of them,
an exception. It's one of them.
At this time.
And that condemnation also earnestly requests the UN and the US to genuinely believe and act in the principles of unilateralism.
Okay.
No, multilateralism.
Yeah.
You know? So these unfolding stories would tell you something. But it has always been evident that terrorism and the fight against Al-Shabab, Al-Qaeda, and all those radical element groups has always been the pretext and the precondition for foreign involvement and interference. But that was not the only issue. This requires the formation of new alliances, strategic alliances with states around the whole. Ethiopia was one, very strong and very formidable ally in the fight against the movement of Al-Shabaab with the US operations. That being said, the West has also been ignoring, in order for its operations to succeed, the West has been ignoring human rights violations, dire human rights violations. Narrow political spaces, narrow ideological platforms that happened and that have disengaged citizens of its partner countries for the sake of keeping their interests, which is the fight against terrorism and the run towards maintaining and safeguarding their own interests.
Okay.
So
let me take it a little bit further to specific situations in the Horn. Just for a case in point, let's see the situation between Sudan and Ethiopia. You are a Horn of African expert. I understand that you have been a senior advisor at the Ministry of Peace. Probably one of the most significant and essential parts of the current Ethiopian government. So you have sufficient information on the actual ground, what's happening on the ground, on top of what you have accumulated with the years of research and studies. The Sudan situation is in stalemate, as you say, as you see, like they have taken part of Ethiopia's border. There is no war. Basically, there is no peace as well. So do you think that will lead to a war? I mean, that might probably disprove or negate the hopeful scenarios that we've been talking about. New and emerging powers like Eritrea, Ethiopia is a new all-inclusive government, which we have now. Somalia is going to be having an election very soon. It has own problems, as you know. Kenya as well. Raila Odinga is probably running instead of having to form a coalition government with Uhuru Kenyatta. I'm an old one, so I know only Moi. So the Sudan, what what would be the scenario? Like, are we going to continue like this for a couple of years, or what would happen in your expert analysis?
The issue of Sudan, I think, is not only a Sudanese matter. What happens in Sudan and how Sudan behaves is not uniquely a position that emanates from the interests of the people and the government of Sudan. You know, in Sudan we have different political factions led by Al-Burhan, the military general. You have the civil government, which is led by Hamdok.
Yeah.
And we have Dagalo's involvement in the military, who has a very strong backup from the Janjaweed as a leader of the Janjaweed militias in the Darfur region. You have the problems in Darfur. You have the confrontations and the challenge that they have in Abyei, which the Ethiopian peacekeeping force has a very significant contribution in terms of restoring peace and security in the region. Above all, and most interestingly, and still a challenge that continues to be a regional challenge, is also the issue of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Sudan. The border issue comes later.
Is it?
At a later stage, yeah.
I mean, after a new government is inaugurated in Ethiopia in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah.
Don't you say that the government have a responsibility, because the people elected it to one of the things that they elected it for?
Definitely, the government has a responsibility to
secure the borders
and securitize the border in the interests of the country and the people as well.
So what are they going to do? What are they going to do?
I would say that the border issue, yes, has to be strictly seriously addressed. I understand that.
Do you think that will lead to war?
If Sudan doesn't withdraw its forces.
So Ethiopia has a legitimate cause to go to war?
I would say so, because it's a foreign country, its sovereign territorial integrity is violated, and as a country and as a legitimate government, the Ethiopian government has, as you said, the responsibilities to protect its citizens, its borders. Yeah, but the Sudan-Ethiopia border issue has been there for a very long time, and
they have never been inside.
There are attempts from the
Sudanese side, but now I heard that they have captured a sizable land, fertile apparently. So the Ethiopian government, it is going to be a new government. One of the primary responsibilities would be to secure the borders. So, okay, I mean, from the legal standpoint, yes, Ethiopia has every right to. But practically speaking, do you think Ethiopia can afford to go to war, to go to another war?
I don't go for any of such options, because we should take good lessons of what's happening in the country now. You know, the current conflict that we have with forces in Tigray is a very good example of why we should not go to any war, any international war.
So why should
and this war is not only fought by Sudanese, you know, that's what I am saying. The issue of GERD, resolving the issue of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam, is inseparable. It should not be seen separately.
Oh, really?
From what's happening in the Ethiopia-Sudanese border areas, because there is a huge interest from Egypt. You know, Egypt has always been anti-progressive and nationalist governments in Ethiopia. It has always wanted to maintain. It has always been against the formation of new hydro-political order in the Nile Basin. They've always wanted to maximize their benefits. So much has been said about the 1929 and 1959 agreements. I don't want to go into details on that. But those agreements have given no respect to the people of Ethiopia, and also to the people of the upper riparian countries all in all.
Okay.
Right? So in the water allocation agreements, not only on the agreements, particularly in the 1959, on Article, I think, 5.1, if not mistaken, it explicitly states that Sudan and Egypt should stand in solidarity against any coalition, any formation of anti-Egypt and Sudanese water right use in the 1959 treatment. That whatever comes from up should be defended together.
They have had a pact for that.
Yes, there is a pact for that. So they are implementing it. And with the weak government that we have in Sudan, some elements of which require and has roots, long roots that are deeply entrenched to maintain and to build another Egyptian empire in the region.
Okay, so does it have any Arab element in it?
There is
an Arab element. Because the next question actually comes very close to that one, because we are talking about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and since you are what do you call unraveling the story behind the Egyptian and the Sudanese cooperation in trying to defend or attack Ethiopia in all fronts. I wanted to ask you about the situation that happened last week in the Security Council. As you know, the Security Council had already referred the matter to the African Union, and that was a dead case. So we heard last week that Tunisia, as an alternate member of the Security Council representing Africa, supposedly, they lobbied, as you heard, and took it back to the Security Council for no reason at all. I mean, what interest would Tunisia have in that? That's why I asked you if it has some Arab element in it. Would it rather be better for Tunisia to be siding with African brothers like us, like Ethiopia, instead of having to take it and exclusively, some people say, an African initiative? What interest do they have, the Tunisians?
So much can be said, but first, to me, it's about maintaining the interests of the Arab world, particularly the Gulf states.
Okay.
You know, the use of the waters of the Nile is not only about safeguarding the use rights and interests of Sudan and Egypt alone. To me, it is about safeguarding the interests of the Gulf countries. You know, the Gulf countries have a huge investment infrastructure in Sudan, in both Sudan and Egypt. They invest in billions of US dollars annually. Some of them are state-owned. Some of them are very private, and has been there. That investment has been there for long, supplying water-intensive agricultural crops, commercial crops, to the Arab world, for consumption to the Arab world, and also for export, to be traded with other countries elsewhere. So the Arab world, particularly countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like the United Arab Emirates, countries like Qatar and others, have huge plots of land which they produce water-intensive crops. They're not paying for the virtual water that they harvest. They're only paying for the land that they leased from the Egyptian government. And higher government officials, particularly the military, is very much engaged in maximizing their personal benefits out of those projects. So any potential increased use of Nile water use demand from the Ethiopian side or any other country up would anger and would affect the interests of the Arab world. That
so Tunisia,
Egypt as a leader of
the Arab, of course. So Tunisia, you're saying that Tunisia is now acting more Arab than African.
Yes.
In that.
Definitely. That's what's happening. That's what we have been seeing in all the agreements and the debates that has been happening within the Arab League and elsewhere in other international forums such as the United Nations Security Council. So it has been referred. The case has been referred.
I know. I mean, there is no use for taking it up unless trying to complicate the situation. So that will lead to another question. Well, similar, because many people have seen that the role that Kenya, our neighbor, our long-standing neighbor, Ethiopia's neighbor, has taken a bold move, actually in defending the rights of Ethiopians for using the water. They actually explicitly said, I remember, that the African Union must stand against anything that threatens the security and sovereignty of Ethiopia. It has by law compelled, that's what he said. He was actually referring to the war that's being waged by the TPLF forces from the north. But Kenya was an staunchest ally of Ethiopia on an international forum like the United Nations. How do you compare to the Tunisian and the Kenyan situation? African and Arab, West, or it is?
We can say two things. One, first, like the issue of Egypt, Tunisia, and majority of North Africa aligning with the Arab League.
More than they do with African Union.
Yeah, has its roots mainly in the movement in the 1960s when Nasser was proponating the Pan-Arabic spirits, Pan-Arabic collaborations, Pan-Arabic friendship and fraternity between the Arab world.
So do you think...
and at the same time, look what Ethiopia has been doing during the time. Imperial Haile Selassie has been trying, of course succeeded in bringing the two blocks
together, the Moravian group and the Moroccan, the Casablanca
groups together, offered the space in Addis, invested in millions, and within a very short period of time, they have erected the Economic Commission for Africa, the Organization of African Union office in Old Airport, and gave Africans, particularly those who have been independent during the time, to support causes of freedom movements and independence elsewhere in countries which have been under the shackles of the Western colonial administration, right? So Ethiopia has been pushing a Pan-African agenda to unite the continent together, while Nasser, on the other side, was calling for a Pan-Arabic engagement, which is a non-African engagement. And that has been going on for years. And Egypt and the North has felt more of a member of a Pan-Arabic League than a member of the African Union, even after the Organization of African Unity was transformed into the African Union. But Ethiopia, through the establishment and construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is bringing that spirit back on the ground and gracing the African Union, the power it should exercise in terms of resolving conflicts, in terms of promoting regional integration attempts. One of which is, for example, if you have gone through the 15 flagship projects of the Agenda 2063, one is the electrification of the expansion of electric grids and infrastructures, including free trade areas within the continent among the members of the countries, because the volume of trade that African states trade with each other is very much low compared to the trading volumes, import-export businesses with the rest of the world.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Samuel. It probably might sound funny, but having tried all those Ethiopia sacrificed for bringing togetherness between the Arab and the African world, the sub-Saharan Africa. Apparently, we don't seem to be benefiting a lot from it. In fact, we are suffering because of the fact that the African Union or what the forefathers envisioned didn't turn out to be so much as good for Ethiopia as it should have been, as you can see. So, at hindsight or in retrospect, if you see, should the African Union have been instead established in two blocks like Sub-Saharan African Union and Arab Union, instead of having to mix two things that which don't seem to collaborate very well?
I don't think fragmentation of the union any further would bring positive developments. And let me continue with what I have started on the Kenyan, because why Kenya was pushing on supporting actually Ethiopia in those international platforms, while the Arab League members, other African countries in the north, have not been doing so. You know, we are not islands. We are not an island country. We cannot. Our rise and fall is very much interlinked with the rise and fall of whoever is around us. The conflict in Somalia, the expansion of terrorist elements, wouldn't let us sleep a good sleep. Because we have to invest a lot in security projects than in development. right? So what happens in Somalia directly affects us here in Addis. Kenya is, we share a lot in common. We share not only borders. We have people who live in,
on both
similar
sides.
people who live in both sides, across the borders, right? And Kenya, interestingly, has always been, of course, a very good friend and ally to Ethiopia, and has benefited a lot from developments that are going on in Ethiopia, the power grids, from the Gibe Dam, and again probably now from the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. That's a possibility, which actually is also true for Sudan and Djibouti, and probably soon with Eritrea as well. So you know, the Ethiopia has always been very visionary in its international relations.
Always?
Has always been visionary.
You think so?
Yeah, even now, yeah.
Even now?
The Ethiopian government.
Now even better.
Yeah, despite what goes on in the country, has always been staunch supporters of international peace and stability, and they have invested in life, they have invested in materials, and they very much know the fact that any development that doesn't benefit your neighbors won't make you a great nation, because we are very much interlinked.
Okay.
A conflict in Sudan, you've said, the civil war in Sudan has brought a huge number of refugees from South Sudan and Sudan, from Eritrea. You cannot close your borders. And that's not also in our culture as well. It's not only the policy, it's also is not in our culture. And in fact, it's also, we are also sharing a number of cultural phenomena and cultural values. The Somalis say their Nemo and Somali Nemo, which means the neighborhood concept, which is a concept that we share and cherish. The Somaliness is one important element that occurs in Ethiopia, Kenya, Djibouti, Somalia, even Somaliland. And you cannot break that apart easily. So if some part of it is affected in any of those countries that I mentioned, our Ethiopian interests will also be affected greatly. So we cannot escape. We cannot grow without developing, without supporting, without working together with our regional allies. So the issue of Somalia, what goes on in Somalia also speaks very much to these truths, like the mention of the election and the political turmoil that we're witnessing currently in Mogadishu. It should not be, I think to me, it should not be taken a conflict of interest between the two Muhammads. Muhammad Abdullahi Muhammad, which we refer popularly as Formaggio, and Muhammad Hussein Robaley, the Prime Minister. You know, there is...
Is that Muhammad Hussein Robaley?
Yeah, that's
sounds like Ethiopian name. Anyway, as you said, it's integrated.
We are the same.
That's true.
We're good neighbors, we're good friends.
That's a good indication.
Yeah, so that conflict is not about a conflict of interest or a power issue between the two friends in the same party. There is a lot of interest behind that. You know, a very good mention is the West is not happy about Somalia allowing Turkey to help with their maritime security issues. They are not happy with the Formaggio, Abiy, Isaias coalition. You know, breaking apart the potential solidarity between these countries and these leaders has always created a fertile ground for anyone who is interested in putting its roots deep into the affairs of Horn African countries beyond its interests in trade and commerce. You know, the coalition, the coming together of all these forces together would make the region a very strong one, and that has not been always what is needed, what is appreciated by the powers elsewhere. And a very good mention again is also the tripartite project, huge project that Ethiopia, Somaliland, and the DP World of the United Arab Emirates have impacted in Berbera in the construction of a huge port, which provided Ethiopia a third alternative to me in terms of our import-export business activities. Beyond that is also the cultural similarities and values that the two people have for so long, and the potential of this new development, the port development, through the development of the Berbera, Jijiga, Addis port corridor. The lives of people will change. Of course, we need to conduct an impact assessment on the potential challenges and opportunities that come along with this project, but it offers more job opportunities for youth in the countries, for both educated and uneducated. It cleans of those buffer roads from anti-peace elements, because once people are engaged in development, you know, their morals will be uplifted. They would make a lot of business. Cities with mushroom, industries with bloom, infrastructures would be put in place, and all those positive developments would not give opportunities for whoever is not happy about those developments to recruit youth for spreading negative propagandas and instability in the region. The more integrated the region in infrastructure is, the more possibilities for the youth and the more for peace and stability to be restored in the region. That is why Ethiopian government has always been very keen and serious about cross-border projects, visionary projects that can benefit everyone equally. And the rise and fall of Ethiopia has always been the rise and fall of, associated with the rise and fall of other countries as well. If Somaliland is not unstable, we are the ones who will be affected most. If Ethiopia is strong, then small countries in the region would also be strong. This is very contagious to me, and
okay,
that's what I see.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, viewers. This is the Horn of African Digest program, which holds forums every now and then with intellectuals like Assistant Professor Samuel Teferra of the Eritrea University Center for African and Asian Studies. We'll continue our discussion with a few more points to be raised revolving around the Horn of Africa. Please bear with us. Okay, thank you very much, our viewers. Again, we have Professor Samuel from the University of Addis Ababa Center for African and Asian Affairs. We have been having a very insightful discussion on the situation in the Horn of Africa and in Africa in general. So we'll get back to you asking for your expertise again and professional opinion. I wanted to continue to what we've been talking about earlier. This time I want to talk about Somalia. I understand that you have been going there for several times. You are knowledgeable about the Somalian setup. I would understand. I would think.
And
learning, yeah. So now Somalia is going to in an election very shortly. There has been a friction between the Prime Minister and the President. Nobody knows how the situation would go, because especially judging from the history of Somalia, passing through so much in 20 years, what do you think would be the likeliest scenario that we would see in Somalia before, after, or during the election on the upcoming time?
Yeah, we are seeing the events unfolding in the politics in Somalia, in Mogadishu. Particularly the power cleavage and the political power rivalry that is mushrooming and emerging between President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed Formaggio and the Mohamed Hussein Robley, which is the prime minister, the sacking of intelligence officers, the kidnapping and murder of a young woman, Ikran, and all going on around. And also the renewed expansion of Al-Shabab, and also the attacks that it continued to mount on important government and public institutions and office, also mainly aiming at the politicians and legislators and lawmakers in the country. But there were good and positive developments, right? Somalia, for long as we know, has not been stable. There was an exodus of the Somalis, our brothers and sisters, as refugees to neighboring countries. So many have died crossing the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, seeking better opportunities for their life. But against all odds, there were also positive developments in terms of putting in a legitimate government structure and power that can drag out Somalia from its decades of conflict and instability. Somalia has been at the center of the global political attention. We've seen involvements by the US and the West, of which Ethiopia was also a part during the TPLF-led EPRDF coalition to protect, I don't know, our interest or the interest of
the region,
our strategic allies. Yeah, somehow it also speaks, because Al-Shabab has always been declaring statements that it's going to target facilities and interests of Ethiopia in Ethiopia and to attack interests of Ethiopian allies. That's very clear. But much of it can still be debated.
Okay. Do you think, in an honest assessment, do you think there is a chance that Abdullahi Farmajo would win the election?
I think that's a question which should be left for our
the Somali people,
brothers and sisters.
Yeah, like from the professional point of view, like you're what do you say, learned guess, like judging from the situation on the ground.
It depends on
what are his chances, or briefly, like 50%, 20%, 80%. In your personal view, it doesn't matter.
If elections are fair and free, I would say he would get a second chance to win. But you know, Somalian politics.
Well, I know, like everywhere, it's not only in Somalia.
Politics,
of course. I mean,
it has not been uniquely and independently a Somalian issue.
Know. But still, I mean, who thought Donald Trump would be elected president of the United States?
Miracles can happen.
Of course,
you cannot.
But you can make an assessment, and then he did, and we wish him all the best. We wish the country all the best.
And actually, it also offers a very good opportunity, particularly to the renewed emergence of.
That's what I was
strategic interest in the Horn, between the alliance between Ethiopia, Somalia, and Eritrea. It would mean more strategic cooperation, political cooperation, particularly ensuring maritime security and access to the port and
anti-terrorism.
Anti-terrorism issues and so on.
Okay. Thanks, Professor Samuel. So now let's get back to Ethiopia, because it's a Horn of African country. Just one more question I have after this, but we have seen recently, in the last couple of days, the international media has always been, as we have been saying several times, campaigning against the interests of Ethiopia. I'm not talking about the government, but Ethiopia as a nation. From various sources of disinformation, misguided and unfounded reportings here and there, we're trying to counterbalance that with fairness and balance, especially with our media institution. In the last couple of days, we have seen photos of children almost dying from hunger, Imashir's children. That seems to be the new front of disinformation, putting images of children for propaganda purposes, or is it actually happening? Do you think the situation up north can be characterized as full-scale famine or food shortage? How do you see that?
I think we need some strong evidences to conclude or to come to that kind of conclusion.
That's from what you see on the ground.
I think what's unfolding on the ground is that, particularly the northern Warlow front, and also in Tigray, given that since the Ethiopian government military forces, the National Defense Force, has withdrawn from Mekelle following the declaration of the
unilateral ceasefire.
There is no much information coming out as to what is happening.
Up there.
And I would say people would be starving, because given that, as the UN also reports, and the Ethiopian government has declared it, stated it clear that out of, for example,
400 trucks,
something trucks that have been transporting food since
none of them. I mean, only few percent have been returned.
70 of them have returned it back.
Nobody asks that.
You cannot be sure. Yeah,
I mean, the UN has. I have seen that report.
The UN in Ethiopia has been asked of,
and they have posted it on their Twitter.
Yeah, and they have also mentioned that they would expect the return of the trucks, but they haven't said anything.
Yeah.
So those were.
What would those trucks be doing at this time?
Probably transporting
ammunition,
forces, ammunitions, and so on and so forth. And you know, the international community, as you've started, particularly the media, has not been very serious in terms of providing the world a balanced information, ethical and balanced information. What we're witnessing is capitalizing on bite-sized informations and a dissemination of disinformations, which cannot be proved scientifically to the world. And they have been refuting, actually, the report that yesterday or 2 days ago by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, the joint report by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the UN Human Rights organ on the abuses, on what was happening to people around the conflict areas. And TPLF actually been refuting that. And
saying that we haven't.
Yes, yeah, and
like, how did they do that? Did they say that the trucks have been returned, or
they didn't say
anything about that?
They didn't say anything about that. You know, it's not only that. What worries me is whether or not the food that the trucks have been carrying to distribute to the people in need are reaching their intended targets or not. Because as you've witnessed, probably as you've heard months ago, high nutrition protein foods were confiscated from the military forces.
The USAID admitted it.
Yes,
actually.
yeah, admitted it.
Yeah.
And, with that, we can say something. We can develop stories where hopefully the food that is being intended to be distributed to people in need might be used for reaching the needed targets. And again, in the TPLF controlled areas of North Warlow Zone, the government safety net program is not working very well. It's crippled because TPLF won't allow the distribution of food aid. And we could imagine, from what is coming out of those places, that a potential food shortage would be affecting millions of people out there unless a serious and urgent action is taken on stopping the TPLF forces to avoid further malnutrition, to avoid further rights violation on civilians. We have noticed recently in areas which have been freed by the joint operation of the Amhara Special Forces, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, that TPLF has left us millions displaced, almost close to 1 million displaced. It's beyond the people who are already in humanitarian support and need within the Tigray. And the loss of livelihoods, the killing of animals that have supported people's livelihood, the destruction of farms and crops, the destruction, the untold destruction of hospitals, educational facilities. You can imagine, to me this is a genocide of the future. those actions by TPLF forces have put lives of millions of people on danger, on huge threat. Rebuilding, reconstructing this back to what it was, to its normal condition, would probably take decades, I don't know. Because the amount of investment that was made
before
to put them to work is huge. And the destruction that we've seen within a very short period of time is very, very big. And the West, the media, is silent about it.
Yeah.
They're not condoning these acts.
Yeah.
Rather, they are running here and there to sanction the Ethiopian government.
Well, that was actually the question I'm going to.
This government's action is one.
Yeah, that was my final question that I had in mind to ask you about the sanction.
Yeah.
On top of the media disinformation and fabrication of stories in some cases. It seems to have worked somehow, because the U.S. government recently has said, as you know, the Treasury Department is allowed to impose sanctions on Ethiopia. What interested me more on that announcement was it said the sanctions are against all involved in this conflict, whoever the U.S. Treasury Department thinks is responsible. So allegedly they actually included TPLF leaders as well. So do we Ethiopians have to be so much scared about this threat of sanctions? And even if it's implemented, as they said, including TPLF leaders, what would the impact be in solving the overall situation?
I think the sanctions, as I said, is part of the targeted actions from the West, particularly from the U.S. as well, to abort positive developments in the Horn of Africa, which is very much coordinated and led by Ethiopia.
Yeah,
and they are not happy with what goes on Somalia. They're against the Formaggio government. They are not happy with what is happening in Eritrea, in the coalition. They're working together of those three in the region to make the region very, very strong. And what you need to do is to cripple the government in Ethiopia, in a view that it is the government in Ethiopia that is behind masterminding all these kind of sorts of development in military, economic, and other sectors.
But if the sanction ends up in disabling the Ethiopian government or destabilizing the government as it is, wouldn't that be a tremendous risk for the West? I mean, this is a very sensitive area.
Because they have experienced it. The attempt is, I don't think it will materialize into reality. But
what does it involve anyway, the sanction? Does
put in place as a banana republic.
Yeah.
And a Trojan horse that carries on what you only provide him with. Right? So the sanctions, to me, as you're mentioning, the sanction, what's written in there, the content says, the United States condemns any actions that undermine or violate the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ethiopia.
Really?
But it says that. But it's against, the sanction is against its own terms. Who has violated Ethiopia's territorial integrity? On November 4, TPLF attacked the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, and it was an attack against the Ethiopian sovereignty and territorial integrity. And how could you equate a perpetrator, an offender, and a state that is struggling to restore peace and stability in equal terms and sanction them together?
That's a very good question. Yeah, let me conclude this with Tibor Naki, right?
Tibor Nash, yeah.
Yeah, he had an interview given to the BBC. He was an assistant secretary of state for the U.S. government then. He was giving an interview in 2020 to the BBC. He said exactly, like verbatim, what you just said. there is no equivalency, he said.
Yeah.
On one hand, there is a sovereign government,
Yeah.
which is Ethiopia, and on the other, there is TPLF.
Yeah.
And he said, whose leaders have waged a war against the legitimate government to overthrow the prime minister, and he said,
Yeah.
quote, get back to the type of privilege that they used to enjoy within the Ethiopian state.
Yeah.
So that was said from the Assistant Secretary of State of the U.S. government. How could they go from that direction all the way to this? It's subject for further discussions, and thank you so much,
Thank you.
Professor Samuel.
Thank you.
It has been an insightful discussion. We are very happy to get your reflections on these very important issues. This is not going to be the only session. We're going to be having another one with you and some other people to debate on other issues, because it can never end.
Yeah.
For sparing your time, we are very grateful,
And please,
very
thank you for
seriously,
hosting
because,
us, yes.
yeah, I know how busy you are, and you spared quite a time with us, and thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Our viewers, it's been a very interesting session with Professor Samuel. Thank you very much for watching. See you soon in another episode